Hello everyone, welcome to our August 2021 council meeting. Housekeeping, we have no one in the forum, so we won't go with too much housekeeping apart from just letting councillors, or making them aware as we will be already, but there's a lot of construction going on downstairs, so just stay away from that area. And let other people know if they're planning to come to council. We have, we'll go to item 2, which is our Tuaki Oroto. If everyone could be outstanding, please. Yeah, Inoi Tato.
Kia rewa ainga iwi katoa o te taitoka. Huye, huye, tae kie.
Thank you, everyone. We have item 3, apologies from Danny and Terry. Danny, our risk advisor, and councillor Terry Archer. We'll take item 4, declarations of conflicts. Oh, sorry. Thank you, Marty. Seconder, Amy. All those in favour? Aye.
Aye.
And just to mention that Councillor Kitchen is zooming in today.
Yeah. Good morning, everybody. Good to be here.
Item 4, yeah, conflicts of interest we'll take as we go. So we'll move on to item 5, which is confirmation of the minutes, 5.1. Could I have a mover and seconder, please? Move Rick, seconded Justin. Any matters arising? No. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. 5.2, receipt of action sheet. Mover and seconder, please. Move to Marty, seconded Joss. Thank you. Any comments? Well managed. Only 2 of them, so it wasn't too hard. Okay, all those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Items 6, financial reports. 6.1, externally managed funds, performance and proposed allocation of gains. Move and second, please. Move Rick, seconded Joss. Thank you. Is someone speaking to this?
7, 8 recommendations.
Sorry.
You can do them all. Happy to do them all.
Is everyone happy to do all 8? Yep. All right. Move and second, all good with that. So who's speaking to this? Anyone? We have workshop.
You had a workshop.
Thank you, Simon. If you would, if you could, Simon, sorry, Simon, if you could just come up so we're near a microphone. Thank you.
Yeah, so the recommendations 1 to 6 in this item reflect the presentation and discussions of the workshop we had on the 4th of August. In summary, that was an $8.7 million worth of gains. The long-term fund generated 18.7% annual return. Short-term fund 10.2%, which is pretty pleasing.
Yeah, unheard of.
We used 1.7 million as budgeted for general funding throughout the year. Through that, we withdrew $904,000 throughout the year to put aside for the enterprise system to reduce the burn on the ratepayer for that project. It's proposed in this report that 596 is taken and put into the OPEX reserve, into TDs for the OPEX reserve, so that the OPEX reserve is at a level, that covers next year's general funding. It's proposed that 649k is placed into the equalisation reserve, and that's for projects that are identified by yourselves. And then there's $350,000 worth of gains that we propose to take in lieu of taking capital as budgeted, and that left $4.4 million to be recapped. Recommendations 7 and 8 are new, probably. It's the same as what we do every year. When we collect rates to repay debt, or we have depreciation that we haven't spent on renewals, we put it away, reserve it, so that it's there when we need it in the future to repay debt. And 7 and 8 are just doing that, and we want to put it into a distinct reserve called debt repayment, so it doesn't get mixed up with other funds. So that's 1 to 7, 1 to 8. On 7 or 1 8.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, so exceptionally good result, and
Yeah.
obviously not all of that will be helpful for ratepayers, but certainly a large chunk of it will. So, Stuart, did you have any comments before I open up for discussion?
It was some of them I'd given Simon a quick call, and he clarified a couple of points for me. I mean, I was, I guess, brought up questions about, management, if they think that there's enough, in the sense that enough of the surplus gains have been allocated to the equalisation reserve, just in the sense of, that does that increase our short-term fund enough to give us a continued buffer that everyone's very happy with, and I think it was more around the identification of future one-off OPEX costs that, whilst the sort of either the non-reoccurring or the ones which are coming up on a sort of a triennial basis, is management comfortable enough that the transfer of the surplus is accommodating those readily enough going up for the next 3 years?
And what was the answer?
In terms of the equalisation reserve acting as that smoother, which is what it is, the answer to the OPEX was yes. We looked into those one-off and those triennial OPEX costs that essentially get spread over the period, and that there's sufficient buffer, as I say, yeah, that's kind of the thrust of it. I thought it was just worth mentioning that.
Yeah, thank you, Stuart. So we haven't actually decided what happens to that money anyway, so we'll keep that in mind.
In the sense that some of it is within that smoothing process, but it was more around what we don't know, in the sense of the buffer, and that was indicated that's been looked at quite closely.
Thank you. Any
I've got a couple of questions.
Councillor Paul?
The first one is a general question. After reading Jonathan Erickson's report and his recommendations, is that, and my own feeling about the volatility of the equities market due to a whole range of factors that are actually explained in there, that we might have thought about putting more of that profit into the short-term fund and less into the long-term fund. Is it appropriate for me to ask a question on that?
Chair, I mean that's not. I mean, where you invest the money is while we're indicating where it's going to. I mean, this paper is more about allocating the surplus to the purpose that it's going to be used for, as opposed to how we invest it and manage it in the short and long term. And essentially, we in deciding whether to put it in the short or long term fund, we use quite a deliberate process of saying, will this money be spent in the next 12 months? If it's likely to be spent in the next 12 months, or we know it's to be spent in the next 12 months, then it goes into the short-term fund. If it's uncertain when it's going to be spent, so for example, item 5, because council hasn't determined when that money will be spent, will go to the long-term fund until council makes a determination. Then anything that council approves for expenditure within the 12 months will be moved in. But just from a financial discipline point of view, we're wanting to try and keep the funds, the periods quite tight, and not have money that we're not sure when it's going to be spent lying in a short-term fund as opposed to the long-term fund. So that's the discipline.
Well, that's fine, I understand that, but I'm just worried about the risk. I mean, the indications we're hearing is that shares are overpriced and there's going to be a correction. When is that correction going to happen? So really our responsibility as ratepayers is to be a little bit more conservative than we would be with our own money.
Yeah, Chair. So again, where the long-term fund then invests the money is the debate you're having, not whether it's in the long-term fund. So you know, absolutely acknowledge the point you're making. Just because we hold cash reserves in the long-term fund as well for the volatility reasons that you raised.
And my other little question is regarding the river rates debt repayment reserves. Now, just to ask a question for some, because we raise rates on different areas in different ways for different ratepayers, those separate reserves are kept separate. They're not, because you said, oh, we want to use them for the purposes of which the rating was gathered. They're still separated, aren't they? They're not actually chucked into one reserve. Is that right?
Yep. We know those service rates, what targeted rate they like to.
So this was there 7 schemes, is there? So it's 7 different reserves.
They're all listed in the long-term.
Yeah, I see that, but I wasn't quite satisfied that with the statement you made before, Simon, that the amount of money that's collected for those rates kept in that individual reserve.
It's kept in the individual investment fund, and then we have an individual reserve that represents that fund.
So there's no way one cross subsiding that. Okay, that's all.
It's kept totally separate.
Thank you.
And just to your previous point, Jack, I mean, we have Ericsson Global and Stuart to advise us on those, where we put our funds, so we're not just doing it off the cuff.
Yeah, right. Well, I was going to, well, first of all, it's a fantastic result. So well done, everybody. And, you know, really appreciate, I'll come to Jonathan because I rang him yesterday. So it's good having Stuart here and good having his comments. And I think we get that success because we've got a very balanced view of the markets. So we're both extremes, if you like. We've got us sitting in the middle and we take the advice of our advice. And obviously we've got a very good financial team, which I acknowledge again in-house. So I think that's really important. My comment was that in terms of the paper, I think there's a very good sort of brief description there of our funds. So I know we've all probably read them, but it doesn't hurt. It gets a bit confusing because the names are changing as well. Yeah, right. So it's good to read them, reread them, check on the name changes. And those are particularly page 19 to 21 are very good on the funds. And then obviously I think it's page 27 on the river reserves. I think, you know, it's worth having a quick look at. And obviously, Simon is happy to give you a bit more detailed explanation some other time. So I think it's good to reread those. They're really good for me to reread them as well. And it's great that it's in the paper. And I think it's good because it's a public document and people can have a look at it and see what we're actually doing, because that can be very, very confusing. And as I said, I think it's only my 4th year on this committee, and yet some people have been here a lot longer, and you're always learning. So I think that's important. So I rang Jonathan yesterday just to see, did he want to comment on his paper, because he doesn't zoom in. And he really, I just pick out one point that you'd like to comment on. So I'm going to page 27 of the agenda and page 4 of his report, and it's economic comments. So it's already come up today, and you mentioned it as well, Jack, that there's a number there. There's actually 7 points, but he in particular went to the last one, expect further distributions from private equity. And so this is a big thing we're pushing, and in fact we're having a meeting on Friday to discuss it further. So I think that's the one, basically the thing he wanted to take out of his report that he could present to you. So that's what I'm backing him on that we have a crack at it on Friday and we have a further discussion on that. So looking forward to that, and once again, well done everybody for this year. I don't think, when is it going to be a correction? Well, we knew that it was see where we would be. So it's coming, but so thank you. Thanks for that. And thanks again, the financial team.
Yeah, great result, and obviously it won't last forever, but the longer it does, the
Do it well.
Amy.
Yeah, just following on from your comment, Rick, that this is a paper that's available for everybody to read. I just wanted to mention that on page 44 and 45 of the agenda, Eric's report sort of has a commentary on carbon policy, and just making it clear that that's not an NRC.
44 are you talking about?
Yeah, I was somewhat intrigued that it comes into our financial advice, but anyway, just.
It comes because we asked for it.
Oh, okay, all right, I didn't have that context, but yeah, all very valid, I'm sure, but just making sure it's not read to be our opinion.
Oh, yeah. That's, I'm correct in that, Malcolm, isn't it? We did ask.
Yeah, Chair, so
report on
that's, I mean, we asked our advisors to comment on our ethics policy.
Yeah.
And this is broadly under that. So to ensure that we investing in an ethical manner. Again, I mean, I think the specific comments on page 44 are in the context of environmental factors that we need to consider when investing. So I think, I mean, without, I read it some time back, but I think essentially what Jonathan is just saying, these are all externalities that council needs to take into consideration when looking at its investment policy, as opposed to any specific advice around how we should respond to our carbon zero strategy.
Cool, thank you.
Yes, Jonathan does like to give opinions, and it's good because it makes you.
Yeah.
Yeah, well spotted, Amy. Okay. All those in favour of item 6.1?
Aye.
Against? Carried.
Can we congratulate the staff on that report? I just think it's a fabulous report and a fabulous result. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think we all
Yep. Well done.
we concur with that, and Rick did it as well. So thank you. Sorry, so 6.2 on page
I'll move that.
52. Thank you, Rick. Seconder. Jack, thank you.
2 recommendations.
Yep, 2 with number 2 having A, B, and C. Any comments? This is request for approval to carry forward operational budget from 2020 to 2021.
I'd just like to congratulate the CE on this being a very small list. Because in the year of great churn and change, that we've only got, was it 3 items to carry forward OPEX. It's pretty good at.
It could have been a very much longer.
Yes,
Yeah.
Yes, they don't all get carried through as all right. Stuart. No?
Yeah, that was my observation, and I've seen a lot of carry forwards in my time from regional and district councils and city councils. I mean, that was less than 10% of your budget, and but actually in real reality it was less than 2%. And that's almost, I mean, that's really frankly a margin of error. And I was quite surprised. It's really good. It's really good.
Awesome. All right. Take that credit. Malcolm and the team. Well done.
Figure out what's going.
Okay, all those in favour of 6.2?
Aye.
Against? Carried. 6.3, request for approval to carry forward capital expenditure.
Yep, I'll move that.
Thank you, Rick. Seconded, Jack. Thank you. 2 recommendations there.
Yep. Moving guys.
Similar comments, I guess.
Yep.
Identical sentiments, Madam Chair. Well done, everybody.
Any further comment? All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. 6.4, excuse me, draft financial result. We have,
So it's only in paper.
oh yes, just
So
to be received. Moved Rick, seconded Marty, thank you. Any comments?
Just a pleasing result here in terms of the 24.1 million, which represents a significant gain in terms of the value of NRC properties that it holds on behalf of the community. The question here is around, because what do we generally do with income from those properties?
Just becomes part of our commercial income that either pays for operations or.
Yeah, because I mean, the question then is your property's gone up by a huge amount, but your returns stay relatively the same, mate, because you can't put up leases or rents, a lot,
I mean,
at pace with that. So there's a question there, is that the time to sort of free up some of those properties and look at reinvesting some of that money, provided you don't, crash the amount of money that's able to come in for operating and subsidisation, because you've got a huge value there sitting that's not being realised.
So, Chair, in this case, without going into all the detail, a significant amount of that is driven off the redevelopment of Kensington. So, in that case, it's in fact the reverse. It's the increased rents that we've achieved that has driven the value, as opposed to the other way around, where normally it's the property values go up and that drives rent in return. So in this case, we've actually achieved the rental increase in advance. However, again, because of some of the sales of our industrial land at well above market value, that's lifted the market. And yes, there will be a lag with the remaining properties that we have, but we're now getting to a point that we have very few industrial properties left. So the impact on us is relatively small from a rental perspective.
So what you're saying is the percentage return on the total value stayed quite similar.
Well, they have improved a little bit in that cap rates have declined. So we, and I don't have the exact numbers. I don't know if Vincent or Simon have, but historically we would have worked on a 6 or 7% cap rate.
Yeah.
Cap rates have declined now to 5 to 6%.
Yeah. So is there a reflection on the actual value going up?
That pushes value up because, and the reason why cap rates decline is because interest rates are lower, and therefore investors are prepared to accept a lower return on their investment when they're purchasing property, and that drives cap rates down. So it's, yeah, I mean, it's not all cash in the hand, and if interest rates go up, cap rates might go up, in which case some of these property values may come backwards a little bit. But given that we're realizing a lot of this at the peak of the market, we are effectively locking in that value on behalf of the council and the community.
But as long as we invest in profits into property, it should be. Okay, I mean, I think since I guess the appetite is we could stand to cut back our shares portfolio, but we really don't want to cut back on that property portfolio. Well, not only because of financial gains, but because of the social gains and the economic gains we've given the community by having that property portfolio. What we've done with what in the past and what we've done just recently, and what we intend to do, have all had other benefits to the wider economy rather than just to our share portfolio. So yeah. So I think we're all pretty keen to keep reinvesting all the property gains.
Well, it gives us a diverse portfolio, and the property portfolio is for commercial returns first and foremost, and it does, like you say, have those nice spin-offs as well, but it's about diversity and prudence and all that sort of stuff. So no further comments on 6.1.
Just on 6.4, I had one question or comment, and that was that it seemed that one of the most material impactors was the budgeted bus fare revenue, and that was probably out of everything the question is that a what's the future of that? And what is have we built in a recurring loss? It was more around the future of that particular item being budgeted bus fare revenue. Where's that heading? Well,
Do you want to go there, or do you want to
I'm just saying, Tony's not here.
Chair, so, I mean,
it's
essentially bus fare revenue is one of the issues that we need to drive. Bus fare revenue and passenger numbers are highly elastic to each other. So driving revenue up actually has a far greater negative impact on passenger numbers. So driving the ticket price up actually reduces your revenue further because your numbers fall further. I mean, as we've explained, I'm not sure if it was this paper or one of the other papers. I mean, just at the moment, we've got a number of other externalities that we're dealing with in terms of poor social behaviour and so on, that the team is working on addressing. And it's very influenced at the end of the day by what central government gives in terms of the subsidy, and we won't know that answer until the end of September when Waka Kotahi gives us their numbers. But one of the things the council may have to consider, and staff are currently working on what advice to give to council, is whether the rates have to go up next year to effectively increase the public subsidisation component of the bus service. And so at the moment, we feel that the shortfall is within a manageable range, that we don't. So when we did the LTP, we considered it and felt it was not time yet to give council advice to increase the rates. We'll have to consider it again in the annual plan, but we can't provide that advice yet until we know what the Kotahi is going to do and whether we can get a positive response in terms of lifting passenger numbers further. And part of that is to deal with the social problems that we're having on the buses. So there's a number of elements in the mix that need to gel still before we can provide it.
So I guess my in response to that, Malcolm, I would imagine then that you're really comfortable that your projections for next year are probably being low level conservative in relation to bus fare revenue. In light of that, so and you're comfortable that if anything, we're being conservative in terms of what those of what the projected bus fare revenue is going to be, i.e. the impact of what that loss might be, i.e. that you're expecting this similar.
Yeah. But certainly expecting it not to improve next year.
Yeah, and yeah. So there's I guess that was all I was asking.
So yeah, I'm not sure I'd be prepared to go as far as saying it's conservative, because the lever that Waka Kotahi still has to pull has such a profound effect.
Yes,
that it could result in us having to do something quite quickly in response.
Yeah.
Which may prove that what we thought was conservative isn't conservative anymore. So
yes,
I think it's.
And I know this is I'm just choosing. And I'm sorry if this is a dumb question. If this is a dumb question, folks, but am I right in assuming that if, for example, next year we get another nasty result in the sense of, and it's material, is it the equalisation reserve that would be used to smooth it?
No, ultimately the bus rate, the Whangarei bus rate is subsidisation. The question is whether, if the shock was significantly high enough, that it was beyond what the community was prepared to continue subsidising through the rate, then council would have no choice but to cut the service levels.
Right.
So those are, if the response is marginal, or the negative impact is marginal, then you can go back to the community through the rate.
Right.
And ask the community to increase its level of subsidisation. If the response was more significant, then you'd have to have a discussion with the community as to which it prefers, either a substantive increase in rates or cutting the service level.
Yes, so look, first of all, I should speak for Terry, because Councillor Terry took over that chairperson of that group last week. This is his first meeting, so unfortunately he's not here today. So he is the one really should be having a crack at the question, but I guess from my point of view, from the political point of view, and from the social point of view, Stuart, it doesn't look good on paper, but the fact is we are trying to create a mentality out there in Northlanders that they need to get on the bus, and that is a nationwide occurrence. Northlanders are shopping at catching buses. We know that they've got a very poor attitude to catching buses. So there are options that we are trialling, if we're going to trial, if you like, to get them on the buses more, which cost more money, like doubling the service, like having a bus only lane for a certain amount of time of the day. Huge amount of money, you're not going to get any return on that straight away. So, you know, the fact is it's going to look poor for a while. But do you stop because it looks poor, or do you try and give the community a chance to buy into something which is the way forward? So, yes, it looks like financially on paper it looks poor, but you know, what's our social responsibility really? To try and get people on those buses. Eventually they'll be electric buses, so that's another huge cost. You know, there's no way we're going to get money back for the electric buses, for the increase in service, or the taking those lanes out of action for those 4 hours a day, 2 hours. So you know, it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Yeah.
So it's a good question, but it's like I can only see it getting worse in the next couple of years, not better, and you don't want to give up.
And look, in terms of, I'm looking at it completely holistically to say, if this is a material component of uncertainty that will impact on your operating,
Yeah, well,
going forward and likely to get worse, then that does assist with the overlying strategy of what one does with realised and unrealised surpluses from the investment portfolios, because that's your social, shall we say, that's your intergenerational social lever to being able to be elastic, which is what you're saying, Malcolm, and totally understand, and also in relation to what you're saying, Rick, because some of these things you just got to do them, you know, and it's
well, you've got to,
and yeah, I mean, and you got to persevere. I'm thinking just more in terms of looking forward, that when there's some gaps to fill, you know, you've got the elasticity to fill those gaps in a way that is, you know, you've got that buffer, you've got that ability to, yes, we may take a little bit more in terms of, for example, realised gains from a particular investment portfolio that's essentially subsidising it, but you're looking at it in a more broader sense, that you're not going to do it, you're going to do it to the full community through that process.
Yeah.
So that was really where I was coming from on that. Just to highlight it, as that was the only thing that was the only thing that came up with me as being, oh, that's quite a big figure.
Just a couple of things. I mean, petrol prices will a big part of that. And the other thing is that we use our annual plan, we monitor. So that's where the annual plan is quite crucial to have those things sorted, or to sort those sorts of things. So 6.4, if there's no further comments on those.
Just a comment.
Hang on, Justin, and then you, Marty.
Well, I would be interested in having some clarity about those revaluation gains, like, you know, where they actually lie, like, you know, how much forestry's gone up, you know, how much our various buildings have gone up. No, I mean, I can have a look at the masters, that's fine, to just see.
We'd like that. I'm sure everybody. would.
Yeah, go for it, Simon. Yeah, if you've got them there.
So Malcolm was right, there's about a $10 million increase on our assets held for sale, which is Union East Street and our Kensington development, so that's $10 million of it. $11 million of it relates to our ground leases. Our ground leases went up 55%. The building, the owner-occupied building, predominantly Water Street, went up. The building went up $1 million, not just the land, actual building. And then our carbon credits went up by a couple $100,000. Forestry, $550,000. So yeah, you're looking at around $23–24 million worth of non-cash, but wealth gain.
Thank you, Simon. Okay. Yeah, cool.
Well, there was only a comment on the buses. It's when you're competing with pretty well a subsidised car park for a $2 all day car park, it's a little bit contrary to the spirit of trying to get people off the road. And are we really costing the environmental damage of pollution of petrol, let alone the cost of the petrol? So it's easy to see a bottom line here on finances, because that's all it is finances. But actually putting the costs to all those other variables, the social, environmental things, that somehow to try and get a finger on them, so that we've got a holistic costing system.
Yeah, we submitted to the WDC on that very matter.
Yeah.
So that it doesn't bear any kind of the rationale was very poor in environmental terms or climate change terms. So we submitted on about 4 or 5 major matters in person, and
Yep, and they've had a letter as well, and it's something that Terry can bring up at his meetings with WDC.
Yep.
So,
Thank you.
okay. If there's no more, all those in favour of 6.4?
Aye.
Against, carried. 6.5, page 65, special reserves, as at 30th of June.
That's only
Moved
paper, isn't it?
Rick, seconded Amy, thank you. So that's just to receive, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yep. Comments?
No.
Thank you. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against, carried. 6.6, regional rates collection, page 76. And was that received one as well? Moved
Yep.
by
Maybe.
Rick, seconded Amy, thank you. Any comments? Questions?
Just a general question in terms of, you know, some of the changes that we've seen central government apply to Māori freehold land. You know, it doesn't look like there's been a lot of variation in the amount of unpaid rates, you know, particularly in the far north, but you think that there'll be a trend that there'll be more and more unpaid rates, you know, with those policy setting changes from central government?
Quite probably, I'd say.
My view is that I don't expect we'll see a great deal more, because the majority of that was unusable as the government.
Okay.
And if it's usable, it's less tax rates. So I think you see a massive trend.
And also the definitions are a little bit tighter than they were, aren't they? My reading of it is, so in some ways it'll be harder to escape paying rent. That's just my first reading of it.
Yeah, there's criteria that has to be.
Yeah, it's slightly tighter than they were.
And in fact, some of the policy settings encourage the use of the development of land, which really mean that we actually collect.
Yeah.
The interesting bit will be how we identify that improvement in or economic gain, revenue once it starts. I think the one comment I had was around provision for WDC rates, outstanding rates at 47%. This is on page 78. So we-
Chair, so, I mean, to avoid us sort of overreacting to a one-off result, we do use a 3-year rolling average for provisions. So while we acknowledge that WDCs is a little bit out of kilter this year, in terms of their collection, I mean, that will be smoothed and hopefully they'll recover back to a more longer term average that they get. I think that we do need to respond. I think we have seen an improvement as we actually provide by council now, as opposed to providing based on a regional average. So it is more sensitive and therefore more conservative than we have done in the past.
And some of Whangarei's result had to do with how they cope with COVID and rates, wasn't it?
But by using the 3-year rolling average, you sort of take out those one-off policy anomalies or one-off events.
Yeah, it was the trend that I was looking at compared to the others as well. But we'll see what happens next year. Any further comments on 6.6? All those in favour? Against, carried. Okay, moving on to 6.7, which is review of non-elected members allowance policy. So this is a decision making.
Yeah.
Moved and seconded, please. Moved Joss, thank you. Seconded Marty. All three?
Yep, all three.
Yep. Any discussion, conversation? We've had a good discussion in our workshop time over this and come to a good place. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against, carried. Item 7, 7.1, environmental fund over allocation. Often always what we do is to make sure it's all used up. So could I have a move and second for the 2 recommendations? Move Jack, seconded Amy, thank you. Any discussion? I think my comment was that this may have to be moved down in future years once farmers have to start complying more at a faster rate, not so much more, but at a faster rate than what they are at the moment, but we'll see how that goes. Any further comment?
Well, there's no risk to this. I mean, if we only end up paying up to 100%, don't you go?
No, technically we could pay up to 120%. I think.
Tiny
As far as the council in the past has always considered the likelihood of us paying the full amount out is fairly low, and it's not material in the context of finances. So even if we end up paying out 105 or something.
It always seems to me to be the sort of thing that humps and hollows and it evens itself out. And there's also some people delaying the payments around the 30th of June can accommodate quite a few over expenditures and just pay them on the 1st of July.
Yeah, Chair, this is not a cash flow issue.
No.
This is really trying to encourage the community to take it up and do the work. It's the biggest issue.
You're right, 120,000 if it was oversubscribed to that 20%. It's not huge. Okay, all those in favour? Against, carried. 7.2, freshwater farm plan regulations and stock exclusion regulations discussion document. So this is a submission that Malcolm is going to approve. That's recommendation 3. So could I have a mover and seconder for 1 to 3, please?
Yep, moving Chair.
Thank you, Joss. Seconded Amy. We did have a workshop on this, and despite the fact that there's, well, we will be talking to the holes in it, basically. And, as common, the principle's right, but the execution is lacking detail and not always practical. Any good comment? John, I'm sorry.
Got a chair, just noting Councillor Blakey's question around when the draft submission will be available. Start working on it at the moment. Submission is due on the 12th of September and hoping to have a draft to circulate the councils on the 5th of September.
So are you looking for some feedback?
No, it was just responding to a question on the agenda from councillors prior to today.
And there'll be further chances to submit, or is
this will be our primary opportunity to submit, but as per our workshop, we've got the high level points that we're going to include in the submission, but we'll also circulate the draft submission to councillors prior to the CE signing it off.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Okay, all those in favour, 1 to 3?
Aye.
Against, carried. 7.3 Emergency Services Fund allocations for years 2021 to 2024. Could I have a move and seconder, please? Moved Amy, seconded Jack, thank you. And there are 2 recommendations. Would anyone like to speak to this or speak about it?
I'll be abstaining.
Okay. Thank you, Rick. That's due to your
Yeah,
involvement.
so yes, President of Water Coast, we directly benefit from this one. Yeah.
Maybe I would just say thanks to all of those that came and presented to us. That was really interesting and very informative. So yeah, I'm really happy to be part of this.
Yeah, it was. And good to have that security for the next 3 years. Oh, Tony, you're here. Would you like to make some comments?
This is basically the formal recommendations to make the decisions and following on from the workshop that we held as part of the long-term plan process. The formal decision resolutions.
That's right. We decided rather than do it at the deliberations, we make it a special one. Okay. All those in favour? Against, carried. 7.4 Adoption of the investment policy and liability management policy. Can I have a move and seconder, please? Moved John, thank you. Seconded. Malcolm, would you like to speak to this one?
Chair, just
103.
Page 103.
Page 103.
Casey's here as well.
Yep, Casey. Yep.
Oh, you know, I was just looking for where it was in the policy.
Oh, sorry.
Chair, just wanted to point out page 105 because there's been quite a bit of discussion around the borrowing limits and interest rate exposure limits. Just to confirm with council, these are the maximum limits set down by LGFA, and please correct me if I'm wrong. So these are effectively technical caps that you cannot go above to maintain your credit ratings and with LGFA. They are not targets for you to try and achieve. In fact, I'd be highly disappointed if we ever got anywhere close to them, given our current financial structure. So I mean, there is a sort of policy and a philosophical debate of do you want to put targets in here that are actual management targets that you're trying to work against, or are you wanting to report the technical target, which is the maximum that it should be? Again, if you look at these are always reported in the annual report in the little graphs section at the back of the annual report, and you'll see that the target is way at the top of the graph and we barely register on the bottom of the graph. And you could sort of argue and say, well, why, you know, why do you have a target that is so far and so, you know, unrealistic relative to where you're operating, that you should have one that's more, you know, operationally focused. So it is a philosophical position for council to take. I mean, our advice, having gone out and spoken to LGFA and outside, is that we should record the maximum target, and hence that's the advice that you've got in front of you today. But it's just acknowledging that those are well in excess of where we currently, our current operating levels are. Chris, did you want to add anything? Because you would have spoken to the auditors about it.
Yeah, PwC provide this advice as a treasury management advisors. And just to note, we don't have a credit rating, so the current limit of net debt is 175%, not 280%. Could go to system. So if you were to get a credit rating, you need to apply your mind to that.
So could we even borrow that much to get rid of it?
Without rates going up 500%.
We couldn't even if we wanted to, could we? Aren't we capped on how much we can borrow?
To the 175%.
Oh, okay. But with, so I was thinking of LGFA.
Yeah.
So we could go outside of that. Yeah.
Seems to me, it seemed like odd advice, given that, I mean, obviously gives us more flexibility, but I mean, our debt to income ratio is the lowest in the country, isn't it? In 1, 2 or 3.
Yeah.
And our net interest on the external debt is one of the lowest as well. So I think it's something we should continue to be extremely proud of and protect. And it's about keeping our risk really low.
And I guess bearing in mind that, you know, policy can be changed if we decide
That's
to
right.
change it, even if we did have a low amount. We could always. Happy with what's in there?
Yep.
All right. Thank you, Malcolm. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against, carried.
I just had one.
Sorry,
I just had one interesting observation about it, and look, I completely agree with the liability management policy and all those governors that are in place, which are intergenerational governance, and the investment policy. What I thought was interesting was that this investment policy is for statutory policy, but it does supersede to the SIPO, and in the sense that if there's any lack of continuity within your investment policy and your SIPO, and from what I read, if in doubt, revert to the SIPO. And I kind of found that a little bit strange. I would have thought it would have been the other way around, only because this is a statutory policy and the SIPO is not. So it's just that I'm sorry about it, but it's just that, you know, we all know that when things happen and you say, right, what is the policy we are moving to? This clearly states, well, we moved to SIPO. The SIPO is in terms of investments that are represented within the SIPO, has the precedence. And I just would ask, you know, just the question: is that the right way around? Is that the right way around?
I think while technically I think I support what Stuart's saying, it should be the other way around. I think this is as a result of the practical experience that we've had over the last several years, and also that the SIPO has to be signed off by council, so the decision-making point of whether it's the one document or the other is identical. It's not as if the SIPO is delegated to you know, a subgroup or sub-governance group. So the SAPA changes have to come there. So it is in a sense a bit of a technicality. I think the other thing is because the SAPA is so much more comprehensive and is a more living document as opposed to this document, which tends to have a longer lifespan. We landed up, I suppose, procedurally with making those changes in the SAPA and then just ensuring that it sits within a broad policy framework. And I mean, there is quite a complex framework and little diagram just how all the different documents fit into each other, because the biggest risk in some respects is to get two policy documents that have competing or different advice, and then you get into a long debate about which is the senior and so on. So it has been a matter of practical experience trying to find a way forward to ensure that we don't end up with governance and policy documents that are conflicting by doing it that way around. But yeah, I agree with Stuart Hart, purely technical process that should be done right now. But we found that technically to be quite difficult to keep going.
So I'm very sure your predecessor had asked the same question. That's before Bruce took over. And I'm sure that question had come up several times, Stuart. And
The answer was that was the answer that I wanted to come out in front of council.
And that's
Because
exactly the same
I
answer.
agree. There's, when it's far easier to take a moving document like the SIPO in relation to what it's doing when you're making changes than it is to go, catch up incredibly with, with the statutory document like the liabilities policy. But I was wanting to draw that because that is a really good reason for having the precedent with the detail as opposed to with the underlying, because I know you only review your investment and liabilities policy. It's not done annually. It's
Technically, every 3 years with it.
every 3 years. Yeah. No, sorry. So
I mean, that's not to say we can't review it on the shorter time frame, but
okay.
sure. I think the other point that I'd make in this debate is that the SIPO deals only with the managed funds element, whereas this document is really reflecting the fact that we have a diverse portfolio over a number of asset classes, of which the managed fund is only one. And just putting the SIPO in context, otherwise, because one's working with the SIPO all the time and it's a living document, one can tend to forget that you're only looking at one part of, one slice of the pie, so to speak, and that there is the rest of the pie that's got to be considered, which really gets back to some of the comments that Councillor Paul was making earlier about the balance of the property, the physical property portfolio, and ensuring that that's maintained as well.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we have moved on to items 8, operational reports, 8.1, health and safety report.
Let me just carry those. Oh, no, sorry, we did.
Did we?
No, we didn't. Oh, sorry, it came after. Yeah.
Okay.
And apologies to you, just note with the health and safety report, the attachment actually, when the agenda was produced, it's actually on your report 8.2. So it's just a printing error.
Oh, right. So people had to go to that
Yeah, it's actually just with the wrong report.
after.
Yeah.
Part of my report. All right. Did everyone okay with that? They got that?
Yep.
So we have that the report be received. Could I have a mover and seconder, please? Moved Amy, seconded Marty. Thank you. Questions and discussion?
Minor question, Madam Chair, just for the C. New workers, health and safety inducted. They're quite pleasingly high figures. That's good. Do we have an absolute bottom line, 100% have to be achieved in a timeline for that? I'm just worried about in terms of our liability.
Yes, I mean, Chair, the short answer is yes, we have to achieve 100%.
But then,
I mean, ideally immediately. But there are practical reasons.
as long as it's 3 months or 4 months or something like that, I think we're right. But I'll leave it to you. But what I'm just from a government's point of view, concerned about any liability workers are not inducted. Something happens, and then next thing council's in the game.
We don't have a specific time frame or KPI for that, but I'll take it away to take.
Yeah. I mean, it's not an operational matter for us. It's just a matter of how's our liability. Thank you.
Yeah, Chair, no, I think it's a point well made. Let's take it away.
Anything further in the health and safety report? All those in favour of accepting it?
No.
Against, carried. Chair report 8.2. I'll move and seconder, please. Amy, thank you. Any questions? I've got one. In my report last month and this month as well, I've added in councillor names who attend meetings with me. Would you like me to continue doing that, or are you?
Definitely. I would.
Right, and I apologise in advance if I forget.
That's what I was thinking. It's hard for you.
But I'm happy enough to do it. I just wanted to make sure that there are people that wanted it. I'll let Cheryl know. All right, thank you.
Yeah, Chair, I mean, just from an administrative point of view, if it's something like Northern Fall together where all the councillors, can we just say and councillors?
Yes, I won't name them individually.
Yeah. Otherwise, just get a little bit longer.
Yeah, get away on us. Yeah. Okay, all those in favour?
Aye.
Against, carried. Item 8.3, Chief Executive's report to council. Mover and seconder, please. Justin, thank you. Seconded Marty. This is the guts of the agenda.
Yep.
Questions, comments?
Just to see again, significant non-compliance in municipal sewage plants. I mean, I'd like to draw attention to councillors. From my constituency, we had a delegation of hapu representatives and school children that came before the council, with a significant, what was it? Not submissions, but basically, there was a number of signatories. It was a petition, so this is an ongoing issue for the people of Kianga, for years and years and years. And then, to see over the page that we are, prosecuting dairy farmers for breaching their consents, and I know that we have got to take into consideration of financial constraints, but I see this as an issue that's been going on the whole time I've been on the council. So, at what point do we actually take the same action, the approach that will take the dairy farmer to say enough is enough, and plus acknowledge, the concerns of mana whenua in this space, because I mean, the principle of a consent is to avoid environmental damage, plus I guess in this case to minimise risk to human health. And people collect kaiwana out of this area. So what if somebody gets sick as a result of these failure for that council to meet the consent requirements? What kind of light will that put this council in? So all I'm saying is we must apply the same, measure of the same measures across our consents.
So your question is, I guess, firstly, are we? So before I come to you, Marty, if I could go to staff for a comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's always depends when you're looking at enforcement action on a case-by-case basis. Maybe it's non-compliance. For example, if I open only a market one, we've never, in terms of the breaches of the limits, never picked up any visual like adverse effect in the receiving environment. Now, with the case of the other one, which is identified for non-compliance in terms of not having the water meter, we would, again, that's not necessarily resulting in an adverse environmental effect, so it's not necessarily a matter we would pursue prosecution on. Where we have taken harder action was things like the Hero one, where we went to enforce water. That's a good outcome, and it's not to say we won't be looking again at this, but we're waiting for that hearing process to open up and marking to address that issue. We might end up with a completely, a consent by a change discharge system. And there will be a big cost to achieving that outcome. So we do look at these things on a case-by-case basis.
So it's maybe, so you're saying it's maybe not the case that we're differentiating between, say, dairy farmers and.
Well, that's what I'm doing, but I understand that it may be considered by outside parties.
So are those exceedance of water quality limits, is that testing actually within the ponds, not at the point of discharge into the harbour?
Oh, yeah, I think particularly with open home market, we used to try to dig receiving water and never picked up any impact even with those exceedances. And that's my understanding, is that they're not necessarily they're ongoing breaches, but not necessarily of a significant elevation right above the limit. I'm happy to provide you some further details from that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've asked them before to have, if we had historical, like how many times this has been breached, because, how many times would a farmer have to breach their consent before we would prosecute? 2, 3?
It's possibly the same sort of thing as well. It depends on what the breach is and what the effect of that breach is.
Yeah, but certainly we had that policy where we talked about the cost of non-compliance.
Yeah.
So again, that's something we can again look at in terms of in saying that, I mean, some of that action has resulted in compliance, so it's not as though we're not being we've done that also with farm we've chosen that pathway rather than
same fines to wastewater plants.
Yeah. So some of those, if you look in the report further down the report, you'll see that I've actually slightly modified that, noting the or listing the enforcement action to try to provide more information.
What page was it?
So that's if you go to itself.
224, 225.
Yeah, just a couple of pages down, you'll see that the modified the report, try to give a bit more information on the actual enforcement action, and you'll see that those ones have been a combination of the back notice and printing notices.
Martin.
Well, it was just along the same lines as what Justin was bringing up. Is that and I can imagine this is one of the large frustrations that's brought groundswell to a point. As we'll slap primary producers around the road. Even central government just listened to the radio coming down today of the pollution and the hail reports from central government from defence force areas, which they haven't budgeted to restore or remove the dangers. So what sort of a signal are we sending from larger entities? It seems like a bully tactic to take a producer and it's understandable that if they're polluting, then you can focus on that person and whack it. But we're not taking it as a whole of society approach towards taking responsibility coming out of urban systems or out of wastewater systems. So we've got to address that collectively. How we get that change, I don't know.
I think what Colin's saying is it is a case by case, and I'm not sure that you're agreeing that we're targeting one area more than another. Or...
Well, that's fine. Yeah.
So is there some more information that councillors want about this?
And accepting that on our present standards, they're compliant, but we've had this petition from Tangata Whenua, which we should be giving better cognizance to, that it shouldn't be going out to their opinion, perhaps my opinion as well. It shouldn't be going out to water, it should be going to land or something. We've got to change our whole thinking towards it and actually start building that.
And that's a totally different debate to
yes,
to the debate about application system.
yeah, no, you're quite right there.
Yeah. And possibly something the Three Waters might produce, I don't know.
Oh, Chair, look, I mean, again, this is an area of significant reform in that we've got the new national regulator about to kick off and start, which is a new we will have in this debate. And will bring with it, new standards that all these plants are going to have to meet in time, as will the development of the new entity. And yeah, we've got some interesting debates coming about if there's a new entity, how we going to be holding them to account. So yeah.
Sorry, what through the chair, we're just one further point to address Councillor Blakey's comment. So is that you recall that through the LTP process that there was budget included by the district council to address some of these long-standing issues. So I know it's not necessarily the immediate outcome, but at least it's been factored into trying to address that issue. That's part of that is there is that transition from potentially moving from discharges to water to land. But that is in some cases.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. For territorial authorities to try and hold back on that is King Canute. Doesn't happen.
At a cost to make that, yeah.
Colin just brought it up. I was just gonna, I guess I was just wondering how that commitment in their LTP around resourcing and whether that puts us in a different space when we're engaging with them as well, knowing that it's sort of not so much a compliance thing, it's more about how does NRC support and encourage the change that we want to see that can then be reflected in compliance results. So just supporting the cause really, but you're hopeful that FNDC will give it the resources it needs really, and there's several of them.
Yeah, because we wouldn't be able to rely on them saying, oh, it's in our long-term plan, so therefore, unfortunately.
No, it's all right. What about that? It's another question.
Okay, so we moved on from that particular part of the report. Rick.
So my question, Malcolm, is just regarding on page 146 regarding the maritime team. I know we're a couple down. I just wondered how it's going. You know, I can ask Tony. I just think it's important that we're fully up. Hopefully, I know we're missing a lot of people, but fully up to strength for some.
Yeah, Chair, so I mean, that is a team that has had a significant amount of staff churn just recently. As far as I'm aware, things are going as well as they could in the circumstances. I mean, we're quite fortunate in that workloads are down quite significantly because of the lack of cruise ships. But it just means that the team can refocus on other parts of the business. We have preempted the organisational style changes by making some changes within that team to reflect the current needs of that team, which is all in place already. So we have been responsive to the changing workload and patterns that that team experiences.
Thank you.
Just on page 130, just looking at that work that's been done in the groundwater space, and just keen for Aqua Intel Aotearoa, I guess for maybe NRC, just to encourage them to ensure as part of those pieces of work they've got a climate change lens on the groundwater and development of land associated with utilisation of groundwater. So not necessarily thinking it's our role to do that work for them, but just ensuring that we sort of advocate for it to be well resourced in that space so that we can get a good long-term sustainable outcome from that investment that's coming from the government.
So would climate change not be factored into the
I assume that it's.
I assume it is, but I can confirm that.
Well, I guess that's the degree to which it's factored in. I'm sure it's written down as somewhere as a bullet point of something that they're going to consider, but there's you know, how much technical nous they have or they contract in with these.
pretty big organisation,
Good. Well, that's great. Hopefully they're awesome.
and they're doing it in 4 different areas in New Zealand, aren't they?
Again, I can confirm that it's how wide that is. But yes, we would
If you Google them, it's
manage to attract some reasonable investment up in particularly.
Yeah.
So that's a great outcome in that regard.
good point. Yeah, thank you. Anything further? Okay, most in favour of 8.3? Aye, against, carried. 8.4, reporting on long-term plan performance measures for the year ending June 2021.
I think some staff have some points of clarification to before we go too far further.
Okay, shall I get a mover and
Keen to.
seconder? Move Rick, seconded Josh, thank you.
Chair, I
Robin.
just 2 very small clarifications. At the top of page 154, there was a KPI on the number of subsidised copper poles. So we had put that figure in there, but just to let you know that figure will be reported in the annual report, and that's 5,750. And also the KPI directly under that on the column are the kilometres of waterway margins protected and fenced, funded by the Environment Fund. We had reported 147 kilometres, but it's actually 157. And there's just added clarification around why we didn't make that. Increase in annual costs on materials and labours, and also targeted fencing, which is a lot more expensive than hill country sediment and wetland fencing, which is a lot more expensive than just flat farmland fencing. So when those 2 KPIs come through into our annual report, they won't be exactly as they are on this, but the overall non-achievement will still be non-achievement. Thank you.
Robin. So we have a mover and seconder. I guess it's just not important, but interesting to note that there's 51 KPIs here, and next year there'll be 31 because we've changed them in our long-term plan. I've got a couple of comments, but I'll open up for others. Joss.
Oh, just one broad comment, really. It's the first time that I have seen that number of not achieved in KPIs. It's completely unusual, but the last year has been completely unusual. So it's really not very surprising. So I'm actually quite happy with where we've got to, given the state of where things have been for the past year and all of the complicating factors that have ended up with where this data sits. So when you actually start going through it and looking at, you know, what has caused these various different not achieves, and a lot of the money just missed out in the first instance by a smidgen. And anywhere else, it's fairly blatantly obvious what the causes have been, you know, and the COVID in this last year has really thrown a massive spanner in the works, basically. So, yeah, whilst I am one who would normally go quite what the hang's happening when it comes to that many not achieved, it's well worth just noting, you know, that that's the case, and well done actually for managing to get us where we have got to as far as this is concerned. So that's all I had to say. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Jocelyn. Thank you for the explanations in that last on the right-hand side column. They were very helpful.
One small question. I just think, well, a comment is that some of our measures are quantitative rather than qualitative, something I've mentioned before. And I think you're setting yourself up to fail to just keep adding more hectares and more areas. They're going to, we run out of them, or you run out of people to actually do the work. So I think, you know, I guess it's the kind of area like unsustainable farm, if environment plans or under CBCAs, HVAs, they can't keep going that way. So I guess in time we'll have to slightly moderate our outcomes, not just outputs, and make it get a better result, but also make it easier for us to report some good news.
Yeah, and I think what we've come up with in the long-term plan addresses some of that.
Yeah,
we've gone for outcomes as well as outputs, or if not more outcomes. But
I've just got page 150. I just wanted to know how we're going with the regional plan. What percentages offered up?
It is, there is a reasonable percent now, isn't it?
Yeah, I wouldn't like to hazard a sense, but
Oh, shit.
80.
80, I thought 80.
So 80 to 90.
80 to 90. Oh, that's pretty good.
That is well beyond our control, let's face it.
Yeah, I know, but I just wonder, because people ask, you know, I can say that 80, 90 is better than.
Depends how you measure it,
Yeah.
as well. But
Thank you.
anyone else?
It's a good answer, mate.
I've just got a couple, and 1.2.2, and I know we haven't missed by much, but I'm just interested to know how it works, like the Treaty Waitangi settlement legislation, but there were 83 bore consents not circulated. How does that, is that a difficult thing to do to get these bore consents circulated?
Well, it's one of those things that we haven't necessarily historically done in the past, because the consents are controlled activities and reviewed as being very, very minor in terms of, because it consents to install the bore, not to take water.
Oh, I see.
And traditionally, we haven't necessarily had. We started where there's been sort of statutory acknowledgements, we've taken a different approach. So.
So is that going to become more important in the future, or is it going to stay the same? I don't think it's in our new KPIs anyway, but
yeah, I'd have to look to see what the new KPI is.
The KPI achieves not in the new LT.
Yeah.
okay, so I just wanted more of an understanding of what actually goes on there. So 2.3.1, I think it is, the percentage of industrial monitoring that goes on, and there were 88 that
Did you say 2.3.1, page 150?
thanks,
We
Marty.
achieved 88 and so it is now.
Okay, so no, it wasn't that one. It was. You go, Malcolm, and I'll find which page I'm up to.
Thank you, Chief. No, just appreciate the comments from Councillor Young, and I think from management and staff's point of view, we are uncomfortable with the number that we didn't achieve, but at the same time, I must say I'm extremely proud of my staff and what they have managed to achieve given the broader circumstances that we've experienced over the last year. Also, just to acknowledge that a number of these are stretch targets, and when we get close, but yeah, no, not quite there, that is reflective of the stretch target nature there. So I think one of the large benefits or that we did get out when we reviewed this internally a few weeks ago was that in future we will also report on the actions we propose to recover where we feel that that's necessary, as opposed to just providing an explanation as to why we've not necessarily achieved the target. But again, we've covered all. This is the last reporting cycle of the previous LTP, and I think we did find that 3 years ago we found the same sort of effect, that by the time you get to the end of the LTP, things have moved on and priorities have changed. So you do have some, like the ones where we no longer do farm plans while it's a technical non-achieved. I mean, there's been very good reasons why that KPI has been dropped in favor of applying those resources somewhere else. So that is sort of part of the mix, because this is, you know, our KPIs that were set 2 years ago in a different environment.
Thank you, Malcolm. Yeah, and I found my place. It is on my page 152. It's percentage of consents for industrial, municipal, sewage and farm discharges and major water tanks. So the monitoring that goes on there. And I acknowledge it 100% is probably a stretch target, but there were only 842 out of the 964 due largely to staff resourcing issues. So my question is, have we, in the long-term plan going forward, put in the resources that we need to improve this figure?
I believe so. I'll explain the staff resourcing issues a bit further. I think it does need clarity. And again, it's important to note that we're talking about in terms of the monitoring program. So a site may require 4 visits a year, but if we only do 3, then it doesn't meet the program. With staff turnover, there is often a gap between new staff taking up the work of the old staff. So with everything that's been going on in the last year, perhaps not surprising that target was missed, but we did try to pick up as much and prior to the end of the year, but sometimes it's not practical to do so. So we did prioritise to try to make sure that more significant consents are.
Thank you. Any further questions on the long-term KPIs? All right, all those in favour?
Aye.
Against, carried. 8.5 legislative compliance for the period 1st Jan to 30th of June 2021. 57. Do I have a mover and seconder that the report be received? Move, thank you, Joss. Seconded, Amy. Any discussion? Pretty straightforward.
Can I just make one comment, please, Chair? Just in relation to the Resource Management Act point there and the efficiency and effectiveness of the regional policy statement, and the fact that we delayed that very much deliberately. An update on that is that there is discussion coming up in the next Planning and Regulatory Working Party meeting about the need for some degree of review of certain aspects of that RPS, and that is something that the Working Party will be continuing to look at. And we will be bringing back to the council what it is that needs to sort of be progressed through. So it's not that it's been shelved and isn't actually kind of being considered at all. It's just that that overall huge great sort of review of it is being condensed down into these are the aspects of it that we're going to have to do whilst there's so much flux and uncertainty in the resource management planning area anyway, with the new acts that are coming in. So just a brief update on that for councillors.
Thanks, Joss. Nothing further. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against, carried. Item 9, receipt of committee minutes, 9.1, sorry. So we have KMR and Joint Regional Economic Development. Nothing moved and seconded that they've minutes be received, please. Thanks, Joss. Seconder, Amy, thanks. Moana. This comes around quite regularly, doesn't it? Would either Joss or Amy like to speak to this one? It's trucking along, isn't it? Nothing too much has changed from last month. Actually, we've got the year 2 underway. So the new offices down below for the Kaipara Morikura will be opening on the 8th of September, very early in the morning. But that's great. So, and we have the interim post Tataki in place with the permanent one went out for expressions of interest, and those are closed currently, and the selection committee will be meeting this week. I think it is.
Chair, we've met and shortlisted, and we're trying to put the interviews together for the
Yeah, new badge. It's a new badge.
yeah, this is for the appointment of the budget.
It's not the same names you can see.
No,
That's
no,
not
no.
Well, that's good.
So
Anything further to add?
when's the opening, sorry?
Oh, 8th of September.
8th.
Is it
And when you say very early,
Don't think so. Sorry. I think invites are going out.
That's very good.
You may or may not.
Well, I'll
Yeah.
stay down
Sure,
at
isn't
night.
it? I wouldn't mind if it was wider.
I don't actually see why you want
Look at my
it. Amy and then Joss.
Yeah, I was just gonna, or maybe Joss gonna speak to this, but just gonna say that one thing that we've moved along is the branding and identity, which has been kind of a missing cornerstone of the group as it in the organisation as it's being established. So that was something big that we achieved in that meeting, which is really good.
Yeah, no, there's ongoing work with that happening behind the scenes. So I am one of those who is actually delegated as part of the communications working group to continue on with conversations and decisions around how that communications area rolls out. And at a risk workshop yesterday, we had some considerable discussion about communications as well. So it's a cornerstone of the whole kind of the whole program really is that communications and how that is rolled out and you know what's happening with that. So it's definitely progressing and we've made some huge strides there. I was actually an apology for this particular meeting because it happened to fall while I was away, but yeah, there's still certainly a hell of a lot of work going on with that comms part of it in the background, but massive progress and we're starting to get somewhere, which is cool.
Yeah, and I was just going to comment on the officers, you know, being within NRC and us having that opening. I think it's just really important that we all keep in mind that it will remain very independent from, you know, like we have the reporting structure that sits under NRC, but yeah, it's really clear that it's a separate organisation in terms of how it operates, and I think that might be part of the dawn ceremony as well, just making sure it's not too much like NRC wrapping around everything. Just that little bit of independence is important for the group.
Yeah, and that'll be part of the content strategy, won't it, Joss? Yeah. Welcome.
I mean, while the minutes reflect the huge effort to stand up the organisation, it's also just important to note that they are actually putting teeth in the ground, which is the primary purpose of why we're there. Just to give you the assurance that there are trees going in. not at the rate we'd like, but we've got a start.
Yeah,
good stuff.
Thank you.
You know, I think an acknowledgement to our councillors that have made the commitment to, you know, take on the beast, you know, it's a huge workload. So, you know, I just like to thank you all on our behalf.
So I was reflecting yesterday when I was driving home from Tihana again, how much more time I would have if
We all reflect on that.
We all reflect on that regularly.
But it's good.
It's not that it's not enjoyable.
No, it's good work.
So that covers KMR. Justin, would you like to make some comments on the Joint Regional Economic Development Committee?
Yeah, we had our first inaugural meeting, really well. I just want to acknowledge support from our staff. Also, I think we're in attendance, and I think the main discussion point for the afternoon was looking at the idea of a sort of economic development strategy for the region. We were fortunate enough to have Piripi Moore attend, so he's essentially, I guess, taken on the old role of George. What's George's last name? George Riley. Yeah. So really good to have him on board with all his expertise. So Northlink really wanted a bit of a sounding board as to what the thoughts around the committee were in terms of how that's, developing that strategy, how that might roll out, and it was fair to say there was a little bit of some sort of not conflicting views, but different views. But I think there's certainly a will amongst the committee to ensure that we don't make the past mistake of having a separate Māori strategy for economic development and another strategy. We want to try and have a combined strategy. So there was a lot of discussion around how you make that work. Who would you go and talk to? How would you do it in terms of making sure that Māori voice is strong in terms of that strategy? Yeah. So it was a good meeting.
That was sort of covered in TTMAC the other day too, wasn't it?
So what we're doing is, I guess, Ben, I'd like you to comment. You were there as well. I think it's a slow and steady sort of approach.
Yeah.
Northlink certainly got some good feedback. So Ben, feel free to make some comment. You were there.
Yeah, it's sort of an evolving thing. So Vaughan is leading the charge for Northlink, and he's just going around and talking to people basically, and just seeing what the level of interest is from there. And so while there's some initial ideas around the scope, the big key thing is about the pulling together of iwi into it. That's the key. What that looks like, whether it's kind of more spatial or sector based or whatever, that'll sort of slowly sort of be designed. So we've got a little way to go there. Next thing that we're also looking to work through is the funding as well. We will get some funding for this. So
the strategy you're talking about.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Marty.
Yeah, just to comment that Piripi Moore is not seen to be in attendance here on the minutes, on the records.
So it might well be the case, sorry, because the discussion on the strategy was at the workshop, not at the actual formal meeting. So he may have gotten that. Yeah.
All those in favour of accepting those minutes?
Aye.
Against, carried. Okay, so now we leave anyone that's live streaming. Thank you very much for coming in, but we're going to move into business with public excluded. Could I have, I'll move, Rick second. All those in favour?